The overall organization of a company is not a standalone choice, but is impacted by four main contingent variables, which are external environment, technology, strategy, and demographic variables. External environment pertains to socio-economical, political, and market variables that are impacting on companies' choices, although not totally under their control, such as market regulation, choices of partners and competitors, business rules, etc. The first variable to consider is the level of complexity a company has to manage. Complexity considers the number of variables that a company needs to manage, as well as the number of interactions existing among these variables. Elements that might contribute to increase the complexity are the number of products, the number of available technologies, the number of customers, countries, and suppliers to manage, and so on. For example, a multinational company operating in 150 countries with a huge product range realized through global supply chain is much more complex than a mono-brand, mono-process, and mono-country company. External complexity requires an adequate level of internal complexity to cope with, that is generally impacting on the macrostructure choices. In very complex environment, a high number of units might be necessary to control the market, and so divisional and metric structure are more likely to be adopted. The second variable to consider is the level of uncertainty a company has to manage. Uncertainty considers the rate of changes of demand, technology, and processes within the company. This variable entails also the level of unpredictability of the company. For example, a startup operating in the Internet of Things industry is much more uncertain than a company working in a process-oriented industry such as the water one. Uncertainty requires to have a flexible organization and is generally impacting on the microstructure choices. In uncertain environment, it's necessary a smooth decision making, achieved also through low level of formalizations and competence or output standardization, rather than process standardization. In these environments, organic systems are more adequate. Moving to technology, the adoption of information technology might support the realization of internal processes. Information technology could foster information sharing as well as visibility, both within the company and across different companies. In that way, managers are able to coordinate decisions of their people and to provide all the organization with the required data, thereby being able to perform a decentralization of the decision-making process. For the same reason, a full visibility among the organization would guarantee a facilitation of control among tiers, and so it is possible to enlarge the span of control, thereby reducing the number of hierarchical levels of the organization. You should imagine as throughout sharing of data inside the company is becoming smaller too, and so easier to manage. Considering strategy, the main strategic choice impacting on organization is the main focus on efficiency or effectiveness. The highest impact of this choice is on the grouping criteria. As a matter of fact, a strategic focus on efficiency pushes the company towards a grouping criteria oriented to input. Thereby, in terms of macrostructure choice, we would expect mainly functional organizations. On the other hand, in terms of microstructure, efficiency is generally fostered through a mechanistic organizational model. This implies to exploit standardization and resource specialization as far as possible, supported by a quite high level of formalization. On the other hand, a strategic focus to effectiveness pushes companies towards a grouping criteria oriented to output. As a matter of fact, the need of effectiveness implies the need to maximize the ability to adapt to market requests, and this is pursued through either divisional or matrix organizational structure. In the same vein, to be responsive as well as flexible to market requests, there is need of flexibility at the microstructure level as well, with a low level of standardization and formalization. This approach is generally exploited in organic systems. Similar consideration could be raised looking at exploitation versus exploration strategy. For the former, Companies aim at exploiting existing resources as much as possible through an in-depth control of activities obtained with a mechanistic system. For the latter, companies are willing to deeply explore constant innovation opportunities through market effectiveness and flexibility obtained with an organic system. Finally, in terms of demographic variables, we could look at the impact of variables such as size, age, or maturity stages. Considering especially the size, small companies are more likely to use simple structure with a low level of formalization and low level of standardizations. Roles and responsibility are deeply shared among individuals, and thereby empowerment of people is higher, as well as mutual adjustment as coordination mechanism. These characteristics are typical of organic systems. On the contrary, big companies are more likely to have a huge number of units, thereby using divisional or matrix structure. Moreover, big companies are more likely to have a high level of formalization achieved through higher standardization. These characteristics are typical of mechanistic systems.